get rolling. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Tech Entrepreneurship panel. The Scalability Center is so excited to have you all on with us today. Today is our fourth student-led panel event of the summer, and I am going to turn it over to our fellows, Jake Osherwitz, Surreal Gray, and Julian Wu. You all are in charge. Have fun.
All right, thanks, Jessica. As she mentioned, this is our tech event, and we have Brett Lewing from Capital Innovators, Kate DeWolf from Well Principal, and Stephen Eit from Dorward. And before we get to them, Jacob is going to lead us off with a brief presentation about the tech industry.
Thanks so much, Real. Here, let me share this real quick. All right, so great to see everybody here today. And so we thought, before diving into our Q&A, that it would be appropriate, to give some background about what's happening in tech, since, it's a very fast evolving sector. There's a lot happening very quickly. And, this is a very unique sector, unlike anything at least we think society has seen before. It would be interesting at least to give you guys some things to think about and, some youthful perspectives. So let's get into it. A little bit more formal of an introduction. We are all part of the St. Louis Entrepreneurial Fellowship. I'm Jacob Osherwitz. I'm currently a rising sophomore studying cognitive science and finance. With me is Surreal Gray, who is studying psychological and brain sciences at Dorward. I'm at Well Principled, and Julian Wu is with us. He is a rising junior, and he is studying mechanical engineering and is currently working at Capital Innovators. And also, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our guest panelists here from all the leading tech startups and accelerators in St. Louis. As previously mentioned, we have Kate DeWolf from Well Principled, Stephen Eit from Dorward, and Brett Lewing from Capital Innovators. So let's get into it. So we want to dive, first off into, what is tech? Why is tech behaving the way it is? Why is it this absolute powerhouse of a sector that's taking over the world right now? What are some factors that's contributing to the sector-wide behavior? And, also what makes it so integrated into society? And, why is it so lucrative? These are questions at least we found that a lot of people have, especially, young folks like us. So we thought it'd be interesting just to dive in. So let's get into it. So first off, according to Investopedia, this grand idea of tech is, this tech sector is an industry focus for businesses and entities who are selling goods and services related to electronics. And, this includes anything from, software to artificial intelligence and information technology, among a lot of other subsidiaries that, if we mentioned all of them, we would be far over time. So a little bit of a history lesson, how did tech come to be where it is today? So following World War II, the United States was really experiencing this wave of scientific progress. Projects that helped win the war, such as Alan Turing's A machine, led to a massive increase in interest regarding these concepts, that are driving computers today, such as data structures and algorithms, machine learning and AI, and just general computer science theory. And so this wave of excitement was really picked up by leading tech researchers from the war, such as IBM, who really were pushing the envelope in terms of technological understanding. And then eventually others such as Apple, Microsoft, and the lot entered the arena, and they began making their own strides. Like according to Stanford in 1977, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak launched the Apple I, which was the first computer with a single circuit board. And, this really comes a long way from Turing's A machine, which, at least in comparison to the Apple I, was very primitive. And this was only 30 years ago, 30 years prior. This wasn't centuries ago. This was decades. And, it was clear that some sort of innovation cycle eventually began to form. And, as advances in electronics manufacturing, coupled with computer science and IT research, eventually this repeated process of research and development, breakthrough, and then questions from the breakthroughs, which then this led to, an offshoot of productization, and then back into the research and development to answer these new questions. And eventually this cycle became, just this driving engine of innovation and new products coming out almost every year. And eventually this cycle began to manifest well into the 21st century. And, this is what's driving critical tech growth concepts such as Moore's Law, which is this idea that, every 2 years, the number of transistors in a circuit doubles, making it more powerful. And this in turn is leading to faster, more efficient, and more encompassing technology. And you can see here in 1970, or around 1970, 1972, with one of Intel's products, which only had, it's all relative, right? Only 1,000 transistors, compared to just 45 years later in 2016, with some of these products and these new new circuits now having over 10 billion transistors. This is a 250 million X increase in 40 years. Absolutely crazy, right? And now onto the question of, why is tech so lucrative? And so, because of the cycle I mentioned before and the monetization of these breakthroughs and their impacts on how society functions, people are beginning to see how much faster and more efficient they can become with technology at hand. And as a result, there's higher demand for these continued tech progressions, faster and more convenient products. There isn't a plateau in sight either for when these society molding breakthroughs are, how frequently they're occurring, because even now with artificial intelligence, this is about to totally redefine how society functions, just like tech did in the 1960s and 1970s. And there's also no limit for how high the returns can be either. And because these returns are so high, now people want in. And because of this, financing methods for stake in these new innovation entities have emerged, such as venture capital, growth equity, private equity. And because of this backing by eager investors, coupled with no end in sight for the breakthroughs, this self-fulfilling prophecy has begun to emerge of high growth, consumer success, and high returns. Really interesting. And, now on to the question, why is it so integral to society? And, last slide I mentioned how tech is, it's contributed to why, or tech has become, this lucrative space, because of ideas, again, like Moore's law. Tech has now not only become, more powerful and faster and more compact, it's also become cheaper. And because of this has led to more convenient, time efficient, and scalable and instantaneous products emerging. And, computers in the early 20th century could barely fit into a truck's trailer, and now they're in our pockets and in our backpacks. And instead of taking years and millions of dollars to develop a single unit, now millions of units can be produced in a day. And so society is constantly trying to evolve. And when it identifies some sort of innovation or an industry or a sector that allows it to evolve in terms of speed, quality, et cetera, it builds itself around this innovation. Think about, let's go back 500 years to the printing press. Books like the Bible were typically made over weeks and months, and it took so much time just to produce one. But with this printing press, now all of a sudden you can make thousands of books in a week, compared to, it would take years to make thousands of books. The scarce idea that was information was now available to everyone. And this is a similar idea with tech. Now all these, higher functions and new access to information, it's now even more available and it's cheaper to get. And, what's the result now of a lucrative and integral field? Now you get, these passionate people with groundbreaking ideas at the forefront of this breakthrough cycle. And we're very excited to have 3 of some of the most innovative technological entities in the St. Louis region here today. And, we're even more excited to hear their perspectives in this incredible field. And so now we're going to move on to Q&A, where Surreal will be asking our panelists some questions about their time in tech. So thanks so much for listening to my little spiel.
Thank you, Jacob, for that presentation and that overview of the tech industry. So now we're going to open it up to our panelists. And our first question, or more so, we're going to have our panelists just tell us a little bit about their company, what they do, a little bit about how they got started. So anyone can just jump in first.
I'll start it off. Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Lewing. I'm the program director for Capital Innovators. Capital Innovators has been in the St. Louis ecosystem for the past 10 years. We run an accelerator program with early stage companies that are trying to kind of accelerate their growth, where they have a little bit of product market fit. Specifically, what I do is I work with the companies in program. We have a fall and a spring cohort. I guess there's a few components to the program. We match them with a mentor in a key area that they're focused in. Those mentors have years of experience at kind of that C-suite level. And then there's some other components such as preparing them for follow-on funding and introductions to other investors and other people within our network. Relatively new in the space, although kind of spent my undergrad more on the operational side, working at a few accelerators, startup studios, and with some founders. So kind of on the building side at really early stages, from kind of ideation, validation, all the way to actually kind of building and executing. So always loved the space and kind of transitioned a little bit to more of the investing side, but still pretty hands-on with companies. So thanks for having me.
I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate DeWolf. So we founded Well Principled several years ago when we recognized major CPGs and retailers were sitting on a tremendous amount of highly valuable consumer behavior data, but they had a difficult time translating that data into profitable strategies for their businesses. So at Well Principled, we solved that problem with our AI software platform, Nucleus, which enables these industry leaders to translate their consumer data into things like better forecast or better price and promotional plans and better ad spend allocations. So we're a team of former Olin MBAs and PhDs, all from the St. Louis area. And and we're excited to be here.
Okay, I'll go last then. And my name's Stephen Knight. I am the CTO of Doorward. Doorward is a property management system for the do-it-yourself landlord and the mom and pop landlord. So people who are small scale property owners. The idea originally started with our founder, who had a number of years in the real estate industry, and he really identified that there was a struggle with mom and pop landlords connecting with good contractors. So that's kind of where the synthesis of this project was started. And my background was I spent a year interning for the Kroenke Group, and being in commercial real estate, I understood that problem, saw it, and just networking around and hearing all the frustrations for the mom and pop landlord. So that's how we got started. And yep, that's our background.
Great. Those are all like super interesting uses of tech, which kind of segues into the next question. With each of you all's company, what led you all to choose tech as an industry as opposed to another industry like a product or any other service?
So going first, I'd really say the scalability is what it is, and the amount of people you can impact. That's really why I love tech. I could have gone into property management or stayed with a commercial real estate firm, but at the end of the day, it's a small number of people you can impact, where technology, it's potentially infinite.
Yeah, I agree with that, Stephen. And actually, I think there were a lot of attractions for me to this tech industry. But the one that comes to mind is actually the pace of innovation. And I promise Jake and I did not coordinate responses to this, but Jake, it really aligns with what you had just outlined with tech. So we've seen, significant advancements throughout the history with tech. And, I think it was after earning my MBA that I noticed a blaring practice gap. So through the MBA program, we learned about best-in-class management models for solving real business problems, but they were seldom put to use because, quite frankly, it's really hard to put them into practice. But with tech and a tech stack like the one we've built at Well Principled, we're able to combine things like quantitative rigor of advanced, AI and machine learning tools with the business acumen of experts that we learned, during our MBA program. And so, we're making it really easy for business leaders to capitalize on these best-in-class management models. And so that's what really drew me to tech. Instead of continuing to bang my head against the wall, I figured, hey, let's go build something that will actually solve this problem and solve it at scale, Stephen, as you had mentioned.
Definitely. Yeah. I think scalability is probably first and foremost, the ability to have outsized impact with the technology that you're creating or working on. From my perspective, I work with a number of companies, so I get to kind of see that broad range of technology. And I never pretend to be the expert in one space because it's almost impossible. I'm oftentimes find myself in a room and feel like I'm probably they're the smartest ones in the rooms because they're talking about technology that goes deep into different areas that you could never really imagine. I think technology as a whole is extremely exciting and fascinating to me because I constantly have to learn new things, and I'm excited by that because a lot of times it's technology that you couldn't even imagine existed yet. So I think that's another thing to add, that it's just an exciting space to be in.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. And, you know, another question we've had is, you know, as representing, you know, tech ventures and accelerators, what drew you into St. Louis? You know, what was the draw for the tech space?
I can go first this time. When I think about tech startups or entrepreneurship in general, right, in St. Louis, I really think it's all about access to what's needed to build the next, right, unicorn startup, and that's access to customers, access to capital, and access to talent. So from a customer's perspective, right, most Fortune 500s are not located on the coast. So they're in middle America. But if you're headed that way, we think St. Louis is centrally located. So it's pretty easy to get out to the coast if needed. Then there's access to capital. So we've benefited from investments by St. Louis-based VCs and leaders like Cultivation Capital. And so there's plenty of capital to go around here in St. Louis, similar with Arch Grants, right? Fantastic program. We're so fortunate to have that program here in St. Louis. And the last would be access to talent. So, our team has scaled high-tech engineering, data science teams in St. Louis prior to Well Principled, and really have benefited from our outstanding university systems here. So WashU, right, to Rolla, and also the large pools of talent from Monsanto Bayer, Graybar, Boeing, the Fed, right, amongst others. So we've found it's really easy to keep talent here because of the outsized wage to cost of living ratio. And fortunately, we haven't had any of the housing shortages and cost issues like we've seen on the hubs as well. So from my perspective, I think it's all about access.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that, Kate. That's absolutely exactly why we're here. Right after that, though, that access to collaboration is that other piece. Everybody is so happy to connect with innovative people. Anybody you reach out, somebody is very open to talk and collaborate immediately. Where you get on the coast, it might be a little more selective of who they're going to deal with. Oh, you got to be in this space or whatnot. But you reach out to somebody, everybody's very receptive here. So it's very fun, very collaborative.
Yeah, I would second or third that. I think being in the Midwest, you naturally kind of have a cohesion of people across the ecosystem that just want to help out. There's kind of in the VC world, there's this large idea that is really limited to the coasts. But over the past few years, you've seen a lot of that change as people start to, fueled by COVID, but also just overall people starting to kind of realize that some of these underdog places, mostly in the Midwest, are places where there's a lot of innovation happening, as well as kind of resources that are already there to support the founders. So I think as time goes on, it'll only improve. So it's kind of exciting to see where things head.
Very cool. The next question I have is, what do you think is an aspect of tech many aspiring entrepreneurs in the space get incorrectly?
I'll jump in first. I think it isn't necessarily something that they get wrong. It's more of kind of their approach. I think a lot of people, especially when they're in the early stage of kind of ideation and validation, they tend to kind of jump and try to build out something without really getting feedback. And that's a massive problem. I mean, you're again building it and hoping that people will come, but ultimately it's kind of a process of iteration and working with other people. And it really has to start from the beginning of development. Even before you start developing, start kind of talking to people in the industry or in the space that you're looking to work in. You have to have a very holistic understanding before really building out something. And oftentimes people try to build a lot of features or add-ons to the core product, and ultimately it's sometimes a waste of time when they can really just get something into the market that's kind of that MVP, which people are really looking for, and get a lot more feedback. So I think ultimately it's just kind of the approach to building that a lot of people often get wrong. So thanks.
Yeah, Brett, I completely agree with that. That's top of mind as well. And I think time and again, right, regardless of how many books or podcasts or experts preach and advise on the importance of getting voice of customer and really doing that, going through that validation period. I think a lot of early stage companies bypass that, or they do a poor job of it. Because again, that's not easy either. I mean, you have to have access to those things in order to do it well, right? But when I think about when we first started Well Principled, we met with several of our former MBA classmates that were at the time like heads of chocolate or heads of cat food, right? To learn about their challenges, validate our assumptions, and doing that in a highly structured manner, right? So we could convert what we learned into artifacts, right? Ranging from customer personas, which ultimately turned into our ICP documents, and also into product requirements. And then we went back to all of those people to validate our understanding and really have them serve as our checkpoints as we were building early on, which ultimately led to our first sale as well. So I think getting that voice of customer and doing that validation, but in a structured manner, is really important and often missed.
Yep, I'm piggybacking here. Exactly the same thing Kate and Brett said. You got to understand that market first. You don't need to necessarily build your product out. You can validate it plenty of other ways. You can piggyback off of Facebook. Say you're thinking about launching a marketplace. You don't need to necessarily launch your own marketplace. You could get the group together of your target market and say, hey, why don't we test this out? See if people want to gravitate that way. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of time in product development, just wasting your time and money. I think that's the number one thing. I'm curious about how people are going about AI. I don't necessarily know how everybody is starting to approach this, but I see AI as a synthesis of collaboration between human and computer. So making sure you have more of an approach from that perspective as well.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you, guys. And then I guess, sort of building off of that in terms of, maybe going the other way with, incredible growth, could you guys tell us about a time when your startup experienced a period of breakneck growth, either in terms of software development or business progress? What was your role in navigating this time? And, what were some of the most challenging and rewarding aspects, of this growth period?
I can start. I think we're still in our growth period. I often say we've graduated from, the infant room to the toddler room, and we're just moving our way on up. So we're definitely growing rapidly, and the challenges continue to change from each one step to the next. But, the pandemic really accelerated our growth. So we're fortunate for that. But we work with marketing and supply chain teams, and the pandemic caused a significant amount of disruption in supply chains across the globe. So what we found is, most of the legacy tools that our customers had in place were not equipped to manage the volatility that they were seeing with the pandemic. But we were able to quickly adjust some of our approach and our models to add what we call a COVID effect to our forecasting, and get our clients back to the predictive accuracies that they were seeing, and actually better than what they were seeing before the pandemic. So as you can imagine, through word of mouth, our business took off. Fortunately, we had built our technology and delivery models in a way that enabled us to scale easily. So going back to that scale piece before, but the most challenging piece of that is just finding, or has been just finding the right talent to really accommodate that growth. Jake, as you're aware, we take hiring very seriously. And what we do is not necessarily out of the box. So aside from hiring, tech talent, finding the business talent that also has a technical acumen is not always an easy skill to hire. So I'd say it's one of the biggest challenges that we faced.
I'll jump in. So CEI is, I guess, in a way, we haven't really grown ourselves internally, but obviously we kind of, through working with these companies, get to witness some rapid growth. So this is more kind of, I guess, anecdotal with some of the other companies that have gone through our program. I think when it comes to growth, one of the things that sticks out to me is definitely the team and the team culture. That's something that's strained as you bring on more people. There's companies that plenty of times bring on people so quickly that it's really easy to kind of keep that company culture when there's only 10 of you all working in the same room. It really gets strained as you bring on more and more people, to make sure that it's difficult. Sometimes people are hiring hundreds of people a week at some of these startups just to fuel growth. And as you can imagine, those hires aren't always the right hires. So ultimately, it's something that people have to focus on earlier than they think, is building that foundation and building a structure to be able to scale and properly do it. Again, in the hiring process, and then more of kind of that internal process. And it's never right, but you can at least think about it early on and at least try to implement something that will scale.
So going last here, Jacob, to be quite honest, we haven't hit our hockey stick yet. We haven't ballooned up just yet. So, and currently we're in our transition from our MVP to our own platform. That's our big project this year, is really setting up all those features. But it was really interesting last year. We did have an MVP application out there after we validated with a bunch of customers. We just let it sit out there on the app stores, and we just had a bunch of natural growth. A lot of people just ended up downloading the applications on Google Play and Apple Store. So it was very interesting. So we haven't had a lot of breakdowns, a lot of ease, but again, finding that talent who's helping us develop this was definitely a challenge for sure. Finding the right people to execute with is definitely probably the biggest breakdown. But once you find the right people, things get taken off and move really smoothly. As long as you got the right structures in place, it can make it pretty easy.
Thank you for that. Speaking of scaling, what do you think aspiring tech founders should keep in mind as they prepare to scale and quickly innovate?
Serverless technologies, absolutely. You really need to start focusing on that. You just don't know how fast something's going to blow up at this point. So you need to make sure you have a highly scalable infrastructure for sure. And serverless will allow you to do that today. And it's just getting better every day, every week.
Julian, could you repeat that question for me, please?
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think aspiring tech founders should keep in mind as they prepare to scale and quickly innovate?
Definitely. I think number one thing to keep in mind is that is to just stay kind of nimble, stay agile. I think ultimately what you're building, being a founder, especially from in the early stages, it's kind of a roller coaster. One day things are going great, and you wake up the next day and everything is going completely in the wrong direction. I think ultimately it's kind of a mental game, and sticking with it, but at the same time you have to be a little bit level-minded with people. So being able to control your emotions, but also enjoy kind of some of those wins, but not get too excited because the next day there's something else that you're going to have to get over. So, I mean, it's rewarding ultimately, but I think being prepared for that journey is something that is really important from the early stage. And you really don't experience it until you're actually in the thick of it. So.
Yeah. And I think just to layer on that, coming from like the culture and personal development nerd that I am, I mean, early on, you are not expected to have like a stellar product. You're expected to have a stellar idea and team and be able to prove that you've researched, your market and that you have true opportunity. So I think something that's often overlooked is for a founding team to honestly assess their strengths and their weaknesses, and then do what we call it, principled, aligned spikiness. Because the fact is, certain people are 10x better at some things than most others. Very explicitly, talent and performance is what we like to say exponentially distributed, not normally distributed. So the very best do about 10x better than the average, not 20% better. So you as a founder, right, you might have a couple of spikes, but you don't have very many. So it's important for you to lean into your spikes and know what your spikes are, but then surround yourself with people who fill in the spikiness gaps, right, that are required for your business to succeed. Because that team dynamic is just so critical at the beginning and throughout the rest of the life of your business. So you're not expected to be an expert in everything. Surround yourself with people who complement your strengths and fill in your gaps of weaknesses. Align spikiness.
All right, awesome, guys. And then, Kate, this question is actually for you. So, as someone who's been in, software and manufacturing and distribution, what do you think has been the biggest difference in terms of spearheading business development? And, how is devising a fast-growing tech startup strategic side a little bit different from devising and revising growth strategies of a larger corporation? What do you find exciting about it also? I know that's a lot, but, I think it all kind of goes together.
It does. Gosh, there are a lot of differences, but oddly, a lot of similarities as well. When you work for an industry leading, Fortune 500 like Graybar, which is where I like to say I grew up, everyone knows who you are. So you have instant credibility when you walk in the room. You can get any meeting because everybody knows your brand, and there's minimal perceived risk, right, in doing business with a well-known brand. With a startup, no one knows who you are. So, we've spent a great deal of time creating social proof, if you will, around our brand, and really educating the industry on why we're here, what's different about our approach, and ultimately why they should care. But I'd say that is one of the most polarizing, right, differences is the brand recognition, right, and that credibility. And so as part of that, so coming from strategy within Graybar, there's just a lot of history there. The industry is really well known. It maybe is not innovating at a rapid pace, but there's a lot of room for innovation. So a lot of the practices and the principles and the skills that I learned from folks who have been doing innovation for a really long time, like GE and others, I've been able to apply to Well Principled. So when we talked about doing voice of customer and really understanding your customer base and validating your business problem, I was able to lean into some things that I had learned while at Graybar and help set up, like a quality of evidence scorecard. So how do you actually quantify evidence or validation feedback that you're getting from folks in various settings, and use that to your advantage? How do you assess if something is scalable, feasible, et cetera? So there are some overlaps there that really help. But in terms of business development, I think there's also a lot of similarities. And Jake, I know we talk a lot about this on the biz dev side, but I think taking taking a sales and biz dev approach that's really a hybrid approach. So not just going direct, but looking at how do you leverage your channel and potential partner ecosystem to really advance your business. So those are things and practices that we applied at Graybar, and that we are applying in a very different way, but applying at Well Principled as well. So I find all of that exciting, to answer your third question.
Yes, that's awesome. Thanks so much, Kate.
Okay. Brett, this one is for you. What do you believe tech startups going through the accelerators fail to account for the most when preparing to scale?
Good question. I think going through the program, they're always at kind of that early stage, and ultimately even have to pivot after the program sometimes. I think they have a vision of what the product should be and what they want it to be, and probably 9 times out of 10 it's not. A year from then they might find something wrong with the business model or something like that. I think when it comes to scaling too, this kind of goes back to that previous question. Another thing I would add to that is also not just kind of preparing the foundation for scaling the team, but there's also kind of best practices that should really start from the beginning. Ultimately kind of building out that tech stack properly. Every company has to take a look at what they're going to need and how it will scale. And sometimes, and it makes sense with an MVP to kind of scrape by with something that hardly works, isn't scalable. But once you get over that point, and you really are building to scale, there's a lot that needs to be done and accounted for when you're looking at the tech stack, everything from kind of the CRM that you're using, making sure that you're actually kind of collecting and making use of the data that you have. Ultimately, I think there's a lot of companies that get far along and then look back and say, well, we have all this junk that we really can't use. But it would have been very valuable if they had properly stored it from the beginning and had a plan for what to do with it. So I think that's another thing to add to just the team, but it's kind of the entire foundation as a whole, everything from the tech stack to the team, to really kind of planning out the future. So.
Sure. Thank you for that.
And the next question is for Steve. So real estate and tech is a real kind of interesting combination. I really thought it was interesting when I chose this venture for my internship. And also another piece to that that's really interesting is the gamification piece, which I worked on coming into the internship. So Steve, could you tell us a little bit more about the gamification piece and how you all decided to incorporate that into the idea?
Yeah, so essentially what gamification is human-centered design to take mundane tasks and make them more palatable, really make them more just enjoyable to fulfill. And one thing that we really wanted to implement and that we've worked on this summer with Use Surreal was enabling landlords to find their contractors. So that's the piece that we've been really focused on here. And we essentially, one cool thing that we're building out is something we call Squad Builder, which enables them and rewards them for building out their teams for their properties. That was the real project. That was amazing. And building out our onboarding system where there's friction, signing up for payment processing and all of that, connecting their Stripe accounts where some landlords wouldn't do that and get that all set up. Another piece I really want to talk about is how this industry is actually really a dinosaur industry. A lot of mom and pop landlords were still doing checks under the door all through COVID. So it was a real mess for them, and trying to figure out like how do we take them and get them onto more of a technology minded platform instead of manual delivery of checks was a real big project. So yeah, that's that.
Thanks for that. And then I have another question for Kate. Kate, you mentioned that you formed Well Principal with Olin students, Olin MB. So how was that process and path for you all coming out of Olin and starting this venture?
Yeah. Our founder and CEO, Ryan Richt, he actually does undergrad and MBA at WashU. He graduated a few years ahead of me. And then, as I had mentioned, another one of our founders, Joe Winger-Murley, has his PhD in mathematics and statistics as well, and engineering, of course, from WashU. And then I'm an Olin MBA. And we've found a lot of value in the Olin network and just support from the overall Olin program as well. So it's, as I had mentioned, it's been fantastic to lean on our former classmates, but also our former professors who we highly respected and have a lot of knowledge and expertise in the spaces that we're operating. So we tap them for advice and guidance and introductions, quite frankly, as well. Actually, one of our former professors is an advisor and leads our scientific advisory board as well for us. So we've been extremely grateful for the network and the support that WashU has provided our business. It's really accelerated and gotten us to where we are today.
All right, thank you for that. And we have a question from the audience. When you all are looking for software developers, what level of experience or education are you looking for? Like, is it a certain major that a person has to have or anything like that?
I can provide kind of, I guess, again, kind of that one step back view. I think when it comes to software, it's difficult, especially in an early stage tech company. Ultimately, people that are in software can go work for Google for probably a much higher salary. So that's really where it gets difficult. So it's really kind of how else can you provide, what else can you provide as a company to this to attract them? You really have to also take chances and hire for potential ultimately when it comes down to it, because again, the people that are highly skilled and qualified, they probably have 5 other opportunities elsewhere at some large companies. So you have to kind of position yourself and sell yourself to them as well, which is tough. but I can't speak that myself, so I'll let you guys talk a little bit more.
So while I'm not necessarily on the engineering side of our house, we do, we look at all different skill levels. I think, Brett, as you were saying, we really look at, the qualification, but then also the growth potential and opportunity. Is there, a desire to learn and to get better? Is the person a fit right within our culture? There are a lot of different variables that come into play. But that stated, I mean, I know when we interview and we hire, we've actually been able to hire through our networks. So we typically know the backgrounds of the folks that we're bringing in. So we know they're going to be a good fit. Actually, most of our team has, everyone's worked together in the past, so that plays to our advantage. But eventually we'll have to start moving outside of our network, and so we'll look at it just aligning skills and different experience working, Scala.js versus other languages as well. I'm getting out of my area of expertise, so that's about as far as I can go. Stephen, I think you should take it from here.
Yeah, well, that piece is huge, Kate. Having your network and making sure you're kind of connected in the space already is a huge benefit. So just always shaking hands and meeting people and seeing what projects they've worked on already, kind of assessing their skill level from just being on teams with them. That's a huge piece, but we haven't had to grow outside of those connections just yet either, Kate. So generally having a good framework for recruiting. We have a couple advisors as well, so we're able to go to them and get some input and find out, get some background more so on these people. Make sure you use and tap into those references that they give you and really talk to their managers and see how they really worked. Validating their skill level and all that.
Thank you for that. It looks like we have another question from the audience. What did you do when your venture reached a point where the level of technical acumen/skills needed to solve your business problems exceeded your own or the current team's technical capabilities? Did you rely on hiring someone with the right skills or finding freelancers or something else?
Yeah, so most of that was just hiring freelancers at the moment, just so we're able to stay flexible and scale, so we don't have to bring anybody on and then drop them off, unfortunately. So really being able to keep that flexible at the moment, we've been doing freelancers.
Yeah, I'd say it's a mixed bag for us. So we've hired some folks on the front end side to really drive our product. But then we have contractors, freelancers that are helping in other areas. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I would say ultimately it's different for every company, especially if they have a technical team and a technical background or not. I mean, there's teams that from the very beginning work with a dev shop to build out their software, and sometimes they already have that technical background and they build it themselves. So, and then there's always that transition period where oftentimes they'll try to bring that in-house as they grow. So it really it depends on the team's background and again, the resources that they have too. Ultimately, it comes down to the financially what that looks like. So bringing someone on part-time or kind of freelancing is oftentimes easiest in the beginning, and then as the work builds up, they might look to bring someone in.
Absolutely, that's great. Thank you, guys. And then I guess another question I have for you three is what surprised you during your time in tech? If there's one or two things, that really, has stuck with you that you weren't expecting or, blindsided you, what would those few things be?
I have an answer, but I guess it doesn't quite apply to tech. It's more of the startup culture. And I've told this to Julian and the rest of the interns that I think you kind of have to take chances. You never really know what will happen until it happens. So one of my top favorite podcasts is How I Built This, and the last question he asked is how much of this was lucky. And ultimately, I think you can get lucky, but in order to get that to that point, you have to create that opportunity to get lucky. So even if it's reaching out, cold calling, I think more often than not, you'll find yourself surprised with the responses you'll get. So I think it applies to more than just tech, but especially from that early stage as a founder, when it comes to talking to people and building that network, just take that chance. Even if you have really no points of interest that overlap, I think you'll surprise yourself with the responses you get.
Yeah, I think one thing that surprised me personally was the fact that a lot of the larger organizations are actually interested and open to talking to a small startup. Early on, it was always this awkward dance. Like, do we tell them how new we are and how young we are, right? Do we really play up the startup piece or not? And we found that we can really use that to our advantage because, at least in the areas that we're operating, and the businesses that we're working with, they're fed up of all the things that haven't worked for them. So they are open and willing to work with the latest, the newest, potential game changer in their industry. So it was surprising to me that we could really leverage being a startup and use that to our advantage, and just how open and willing folks are to engage.
I'd say for me, this goes back to kind of Brett's point he had mentioned earlier in an earlier question, just how quickly things move. Day by day, there's a bunch of wins and then there's a bunch of losses, and I can't tell you like what happened last week just because it's just massive, just how many things can occur in one single day, just from picking up the phone and having one conversation and, somebody loves the product, wants in, they want to help out, they got this connection, and then you're talking to somebody else that same exact day, and it's crazy. It's a ride for sure. I don't think that's necessarily tech exclusive though, but yeah, it's moves a lot very fast, and you don't want to sit on, oh no, we're down low, we had a bad day, because in the afternoon you could be riding high.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's very true. And, I've been seeing a lot of nodding. So, all right. And then I guess, another thing, I know, Kate, you discussed this a bit earlier, but, I think I'd love to hear this more in depth from you, and also elaborate a bit more from, Brett and Steven, how has COVID impacted your startup?
I can jump in from a perspective of seeing a bunch of startups. I think ultimately COVID convinced a lot of people that were in their corporate cushy jobs to kind of take that chance. There was less certainty, and people wanted to pursue things that they've been always kind of dreaming about. So I think in the past year, there's been a lot of people that have switched to building something of their own, which is great from an accelerator standpoint. It means we get great applications and great founders as well with awesome backgrounds. And again, kind of you'll see whenever there's a downturn in the economy, that's kind of when a lot of these new ideas start to really flourish. And over the next few years, I guess we'll get to see some of these companies that came out of COVID that are really dominating. So.
Yeah, I would say the level of people that just started reaching out to me, just, looking to get out of their career, that definitely skyrocketed. A lot of people just kind of sick of the humdrum and I guess we're cooped up, tired of being in their houses, and they really wanted to gravitate somewhere else. So a lot of people just reach out, just looking for something interesting, seeing how they could help out and all that and get involved. The other piece was market demand and how fast we needed to actually get rolling on this. So we raised our seed round actually back in January, and that's when everybody was just boom right in on it, and everybody understood the idea. Everybody understands the need just immediately now, or the year before when we were trying to sell it wasn't the same.
Yeah, and I think one other observation, during the pandemic, we stayed very close to the venture capital scene and just funding opportunities in general. And there was an obvious slowdown in venture dollars and investments overall, sure, but we found that a lot of the middle America VCs, they were operating business as usual, and there were significant investments made during the pandemic. So it was nice to see that those VC dollars and those the funding opportunities were still flowing during the pandemic.
I would add one more thing too, and I think this kind of ties into Kate's mentioned before with corporate. I guess working with startups, I think it really accelerated that too. A lot of them are especially when it comes to supply chain, realizing how unprepared they are and how quickly or how slowly they can't innovate. So that's where they're really bringing in startups and realizing that they need to expand their reach and start working with some of these more nimble companies. So that's just another kind of another thing that was created because of COVID.
Yep. And we have one more audience question from Paul. How do you avoid burnout with your venture, as far as, it can be a sprint and a marathon, like you have to kind of go, but then you kind of have to be patient and wait for certain things. So how do you secure downtime?
So for us, we're pretty strict on making sure people only work 40 hours a week. So we really do our best to limit that and make sure that everybody below our leadership team doesn't see us working outside those hours. Although sometimes at night we do like to stay up and do some exploration. So really making sure that you're really clear about your time, because recuperation is very important. And depending on how you use your free time, it could be beneficial just to be learning or networking. And we just really make sure that we stay consistent every week so we don't get burned out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think from our perspective, we try to over communicate on priorities and set a realistic expectation of what is actually required to meet a deliverable within a given sprint, for example. So there are cases where you are just sprinting and you are going and you're kind of in that hamster wheel, and you just go to deliver for a customer, for example, so we could get our next sale or whatever it may be. But we don't cry wolf. So the team works in those sprints really hard, and they will give it their all when they need to. But then we also make sure they take their foot off the gas and are setting a consistent, pace for development, because as you had mentioned, burnout is real, and you have to really manage that.
It's one of the toughest things. I mean, you can say to an extent time management and keeping a good calendar, but ultimately it's out of your control sometimes. In the startup world, you can only schedule so much, and things change, things pop up last minute, and you really just have to it's more of kind of self-awareness and being able to take a step back when it's needed, which is a skill in itself, I guess. Ultimately, I think I think one thing that you can actually do to implement is really try to keep that balance by separating different tasks. And it's even harder for people that work from home. But myself, I purposely kind of keep work on a separate account on my laptop and my regular life on the other account on my laptop. So that's just kind of one small step, but ultimately it's just kind of self-recognition and knowing when you're burnt out, and stepping back for a minute, and also communicating that with your team.
All right, thank you guys. I think we had another question in the chat. I'm trying to find it. Jacob or Julian, if you get it to it before me, you can ask.
Let's see. I think there was just that one question from Trey, and that was already answered. So I think that is it from the audience.
All right, well, with that, we're in good time. So it's 4:32. So if we have any last questions or comments from our panelists or anybody in the audience, you can unmute or drop that in the chat. Otherwise, we thank everybody for coming out. We thank all of our panelists for their time and their answers, Stephen, Brett, and Kate. We thank you all for being here. And yeah, that is all we have for you all.
Great
Thanks
job,
for having me.
Surreal. Thank you all so much. The Scalability Center has got one more panel next week on getting back to work in the entrepreneurial community. So please join us for that next week. Have a great rest